You know, after all these years of the hardships that I've endured, trying to do the right thing, I can sure use a vacation. I wonder where I would go if I could. Hello, today is November 23rd, 2021, and the time is 2:26 p.m. I'm going to further expand on Kyle Rittenhouse case and tie that into with current worldwide events. Everything does tie in together, and a lot of people, probably most people, tend to focus on the highlights of what things are going on. Maybe that's all people can handle, I don't know. But people need to understand, for example, with current worldwide events, say a foundation of injustice that could be or is taking place or maybe even will be. Now, when you look at the Rittenhouse case, I was watching a video earlier, a short video. There was a bunch of lawyers sitting, bantering about when the defense, and I did see that clip of the defense, I believe it was last week, talking about a mistrial. And because the quality of video they had from this drone footage was very poor quality as opposed to what the prosecution had, and they were trying to say that if they had a better quality, their whole defense would have been completely different. Now, when I had seen that originally, and as these lawyers were bantering on about the defense, they weren't necessarily looking for the judge to make a ruling. Yes, it's a mistrial. But they were trying to introduce it during the trial proper, the main trial, the first trial. Because, well, a lot of people don't understand about, for example, appeals is, and I'm going to be very basic here, appeals are based on judicial error. And yes, you can kind of expand on that. So what they were trying to do, the defense in that case, was trying to introduce the fact that, yes, they were disadvantaged. They were the disadvantaged party, which now that it was introduced in the trial proper, they would be able to introduce that into an appeal. During my case, I'm just going to recap a little bit here from my personal perspective. I did go through, in the end, 4 different lawyers. The first 2 lawyers I had prior to my taking over the trial, I had a first lawyer who already had told me that I'm not going to get a fair trial because of what I was up against. And I'm not going to get into all the details on why I ended up terminating him. This was back in 2013. And the post-traumatic stress and the injuries I was sustaining, the physical pain, was overwhelming. In the summer of 2013, keeping in mind that my event took place on May 4th, 2013, it was very surreal. And I was still dealing with the shock and everything else. I couldn't even have a coherent conversation with anyone. I was that bad. So I couldn't even fathom taking over my own case. And there's an old saying for people who are practicing laws, you never want to be your own client. Again, you know, the same can apply to doctors. You never want to be your own patient. But I digress. So I had the first lawyer, and the second lawyer I paid very well, even under the table, because I knew what I was up against. And that's when I learned that the senior counsel, former counsel now, for the city, had threatened my second lawyer. And I had to take over the trial. Now, during my trial, when I had taken over, I had 2 voir dires. The first voir dire, I was introducing the evidence that was being suppressed, the evidence that was being withheld regarding the female, which was going to be the basis of convicting me. And I seen it coming. And I believe it was the second voir dire where I had, now a voir dire, for anyone who doesn't know, basically in layperson's terms, it's like a trial within a trial, okay? The second voir dire, I had a list of things which included a mistrial, to have the judge excuse himself from the case, and other issues. So there was a whole list of issues. I think there was like 10 of them, 10 or 12 issues. And I realized when you ask the judge that he needs to recuse himself from a case, it's up to them if they want to, regardless of the reason why you want them to and why they won't. When you do something like that, you really, really can tick off a judge. You don't want to be doing that kind of stuff. But I was up against severe corruption. So I had put all these things in, and actually, I believe there was actually a third voir dire, where later I had filed for a Section 11B charter argument. In Canada, Section 11B of the charter states to be tried within a reasonable time. Now, I believe there was a case, it was R versus Askoff. It was somewhere around the 90s. I can't remember exactly when, 89 maybe, around 1990, somewhere around there, where they had a limit to be tried within. And then there was a ruling, R versus Jordan, in 2016 from the Supreme Court, where they were saying 18 months to be tried in a case like mine. And the Supreme Court even said that that ruling goes back retroactively. So any active cases that are out, people will be able to use R versus Jordan, or we just call it Jordan. So I had filed that in between the time that I was convicted in July 2016, and I was sentenced in December. This is how ridiculous my case is. It took them that long. During that time, I had filed for the Section 11B, and even the Crown prosecutor had told me, yes, it exceeded it, and whether he meant it or not, I don't know, but he told me on the hall that, we're going to make this go away for you. The trial judge, the trial proper, even refused the Crown prosecutor, saying that, yeah, it took too long, but the trial took too long. What happens if it was ruled in my favor is everything would have been stayed, for example. So it basically, what that means is those charges, I'm not found innocent or guilty. It's just the charges are limbo for the rest of my life. I didn't want to do that sooner because I didn't want to have this hanging over my head. So anyone looking through CPIC or a police computer database would see that, make their own assumptions. So I wanted the opportunity to prove my innocence against corruption. Pretty stupid, but whatever. So I did the Section 11B, and the trial judge ruled even against what the Crown prosecutor was saying, that it took too long. The trial prosecutor and I, we disagreed on how much longer it took. The point is, though, it exceeded 18 months. If I'm remembering, I think it was like 49 months to convict me. Like over those years, I've seen people commit serious crimes like murder, armed robbery and stuff, get tried, get sentenced within months. I've seen so many cases, but mine just dragged on because when I took over the trial, I didn't make it easy. Now, as soon as I was convicted, I filed my first level of appeal, the Queen's Bench appeal in Alberta. And because I filed my own materials, I'm thinking there's no way that anyone can mess this up, how wrong I was. I had secured a judge, I'm trying to remember the term, it just popped out of my head, for that, and so I had a third lawyer, and the day the arguments were being made, we had to wait from, I think it was December to May, for this judge who was seized, that's the word I was looking for, seized, his next availability. And that morning, literally just before court, they switched judges. And all the key points of my appeal, including the Section 11B of the charter argument, nothing ruled on. Again, I filed my own materials for the next level of appeal, a fourth lawyer, and no rulings on any of the key major points of anything. I'm just going to add in here that both the Queen's Bench appeal as well as the Provincial Court of Appeal of Alberta didn't rule on any of the major key points that I was basing my appeal on. And I had two lawyers, one for each, that, well, didn't really argue that point. Now, during the Court of Appeal, I think it was either the fourth or fifth prosecutor on this case, because apparently none of them wanted to touch my case, said to the judge that if this goes to the Supreme Court, they're not going to be representing, which would have meant that I would have won by default. Now, after that, and there's a reason why I'm sharing all this, so you have an idea of my firsthand experience with this. There were some lawyers back home that were willing to take this to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court of Canada turned around and said, well, they can't make any rulings on things that haven't been ruled on, which meant I would have had to brought it back to the Alberta courts, which basically you're going to the same court saying, hey, you guys made a mistake, you have to make a ruling on these things. With the level of corruption in that city, it was never going to happen. So I just kind of abandoned that. But going back to the Kyle Rittenhouse matter, when I had seen those lawyers mention the mistrial and why and everything else, I knew exactly what they were doing, because you have to introduce it into the trial proper. And we see other people being railroaded. And I use Daniel Holtzclaw a lot as an example, because the guy is serving 265 years for crimes he never committed. And there's so many people, like with Daniel Holtzclaw, even Stephen Avery, in other cases. And I'm probably, well, actually I do know with my case as well, because there was some law students, as soon as the trial judge published, he didn't have to publish it, but he published my conviction, they were saying that, oh, I should be serving 6 years of hard time and all this other nonsense because of allegedly assaulting a police officer in obstruction, not knowing the details of anything. A lot of people say with Daniel Holtzclaw, like, yeah, he deserved it, he should, he should rot in hell and all this other stuff. Because that's the world we live in. People are bloodthirsty, and people are making assumptions that, say, for example, someone convicted is actually guilty. And I've said before, more than 60% of people convicted of anything are actually innocent. But I don't want to go down. I've talked about this in other videos. So how does this all tie in, this type of injustice, with current world events? Very easy. Because what we're seeing is, for example, okay, I'm just going to pause for a second here. A lot of people are saying a lot of things that are being imposed are not laws. What people fail to understand, the common person, I see this constantly, especially in posts and comments. What people don't understand, there's something called the force of law, okay? And real established laws are being used to enforce, for example, something that isn't law. And what we're going to be finding more and more now is a lot more of the injustices that Kyle Rittenhouse was almost a victim of, what Daniel Holtzclaw is a victim of, even Stephen Avery a victim of, and yours truly a victim of that type of injustice. And what we're seeing is, or we're going to be seeing, is more and more people being charged, convicted of things related to current worldwide events, whether it be directly or indirectly. And the precedent that has been established, set for innocent people to be convicted, sometimes even jailed, whether it be intermittent or like serving the sentence in full, like at once. We're going to see this more and more related to current worldwide events. And this is why I'm really trying to highlight this, because nobody's talking about this, and apparently I don't think many people are even thinking about this, or only seeing the highlights. and looking at everything superficially. So what I'm trying to do is say, I'm going to the roots of everything. And this is how, in part, a lot of what I've been, as a descriptive, predicting is coming true, because I'm seeing things at a deeper level and I'm able to project of, okay, this is the direction everything's going to be heading. I don't want to be right about anything. So I'm just trying to give you some extremely basic knowledge on the legal system and how, possibly why, it's as corrupt as it is, and how it's allowed to continue, or why it keeps continuing. But we're going to see a lot more of this as people are dealing with current worldwide events and the hardships that they're going to endure afterwards. And it's terrible. Not only do we see this with everything that I've discussed so far in this video, but when you look at the make work programs that the legal system has come up with, for example, when you look at real crime rates, they're at an all-time low, but yet the courts, police, and even jails and prisons and stuff are at an all-time high. You got to wonder, how is this even possible? Because, and I've said this before, law has become like theoretical mathematics, neither of which have a basis in reality anymore. And what I mean by that is, an example would be drinking and driving. Now, I'm not promoting drinking and driving at all, like dumb. But it has become so loose. When you hear of drinking and driving, you automatically, first thing you do is you picture in your head somebody that can't even walk or talk or see straight driving, and some catastrophe happens. And it does happen. I'm not denying that at all. But now people are being charged for DUI when they might have had one beer hours prior to driving. They're completely sober. But the devices that they're using to detect and the methods that they're using, you had a beer 3 hours ago, so zero tolerance. So they keep lowering the standard, because it's like, oh, we're at this level, no one's committing a crime, so we're going to keep lowering it. We see this across the board for everything. Over the years, I've talked about how feminism, if there's any feminists out there, whatever, had skewed what rape is. And that's why when I say in the early 90s to mid 90s, when I worked in corrections dealing with real rapists and real pedophiles, I say real because now rape is so skewed. There was, just off the top of my head, I remember there's a case maybe about 4 or 5 years ago where a guy was charged and convicted of raping this woman based on them having consensual sex after the fact. And I'm not making this up. She didn't like how he handled her nipples. A little bit too rough or something. That was it. Well, she was fine with everything else, but he was maybe a little bit too rough. I don't know the details. Her nipples. So now he's a convicted rapist. He has to register, all the whole 9 yards, over nothing. And that's what I mean about the courts and the police and even politics and everyone involved in that area. They're making work. They've got to justify their jobs. Now, again, all this is the foundation of what's happening with current worldwide events. And it's just going to blindside everyone. And I've said repeatedly since last year, current worldwide events have nothing to do with laws, constitutions, rights, none of that. Or even, well, I'm not going to say because I want to keep the video up, but this is how it's all going to play out. This is what people have to expect, brace themselves, prepare for. Nothing is going to change what's happening. And I've said in other videos dedicated to the topic of why, for example, marches are allowed, protests, petitions, even online social groups. All these things are allowed to diffuse people. But anyway, I digress. So I just wanted to give some insight with current worldwide events, showing what almost happened to Kyle Rittenhouse, what has happened to Daniel Holtzclaw. And again, please watch his documentary, Daniel in the Den. It will floor you. And even Stephen Avery, Making of a Murderer. And follow my story. This is the foundation that's going to be impacting a lot of people, if not already, in the near future. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.